Hello, and welcome to Brand Clarity by Visions to Images, where we focus on strategy and business development for entrepreneurs at all different levels through branding and digital marketing techniques. Susie Liberatore is the founder and art director of Visions to Images Creative Services, LLC. For the last decade, she has personally been instrumental in bridging gaps between the global digital market and neighborhood locations for some of the biggest brands around. Growth is possible for even a single location with the right professional branding techniques and Susie's signature strategies of Visions to Images. Stand out from your competitors and bring your visions to life while watching your sales skyrocket. Your host for this is Susie Liberatore, owner of Visions to Images. Hello, everybody. Today I have Esther Littlefield. She's a marketing strategist for Christian women, and I'm super excited to have her on. She's amazing. I love her little Facebook group. I am a Christian, so I always love seeing all these other inspirational and fun things. And then she helped me with my podcast as well. So I'm excited. Welcome.
Thank you, Susie. I'm super happy to be here with you today.
Yes. So tell me a little bit. I know you have such an incredible backstory. Tell me how you got started with all of the fun stuff that you're into.
Okay, I try to keep the backstory short, but it is definitely a long and winding road, I think, for most of us in how we get to where we are. But my background is actually in social work. I never dreamed I would have my own business or any of that. Like growing up, that wasn't really part of my dream. I went into social work, worked in social work for 10 years. But at the beginning of my career, I got invited to a direct sales party for scrapbooking, and I ended up signing up to be a consultant.
Oh my God.
And that began my entrepreneurial career because I started to realize, oh, there's like a way I can make a little extra money on the side.
Right. Totally.
And, social work isn't exactly the most lucrative career financially. So I went into that and, worked alongside of that. And I ended up with a different company and built a pretty decent income with a direct sales company. But I got to a point where I was burnt out and I was not doing anything that I loved. I was not using my gifts. I wasn't following the dreams that I actually did have. And so then I went into the world of online business and I started blogging. I had actually had a blog for years, but never really did anything with it. And so I actually went into listening to podcasts, listening to webinars, diving into this whole space of figuring out how could I grow something online. And that's really where it all began. That was back in 2015. And then in 2017, I transitioned into really being a service provider and taking everything I had learned to do for myself and starting to do it for others, and was a virtual assistant and then an OBM. And then gradually shifted into taking all of what I have learned and done between podcasting and marketing and all of that, and really now helping other women be able to build something online and, do it, without compromising their faith and values. That's part of what I really focus on with my audience. So that's that's kind of the short version of how I got to where I am now.
Yes, I love it. Thanks for sharing. So, there was a couple of things that stood out to me. The burnt out part is so important because even still, even as any entrepreneur, any business, anybody who even works can be burnt out easily, right? So there's always those factors of how to figure out what to do to not get burnt out, because we can all do it. And I actually was going through some stressing points. I don't know if I was burnt out over the past week, but just those little points where you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How do I get rid of all of this stuff? So it's important to notice those things no matter where you are in your career in life. And then the funny part is I think that everybody always starts as a VA or OBM. I feel like everybody always has that story, right? I knew I wanted to have my own agency. I wanted to have graphics done for people, all that fun stuff. But the truth of the matter is I started off as a VA because I was like, do people even want to pay for this when I was on my own? In the agency, in the big corporate world, they would pay for it, of course. But when you're in a whole different field, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So I think everybody I've ever talked with always says they start off as a VA or an OBM because it's the way to kind of get in, but you're cutting yourself so short is what I've noticed. Yes. And then the other part is the online stuff. Online is so important, right? I was reading last night about Mark for Facebook. He is trying to do more e-commerce benefits for everybody on Facebook and Instagram, and a lot of stuff is changing. And it's taking over the world, to be honest. Online and digital and e-commerce, the pandemic, I think, had a big influence on it. And I don't want to talk about the pandemic because that's a whole other thing. But I mean, I haven't stepped foot into a store to actually shop in forever. So it's so interesting to have that online experience that you talked about because it's there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the point that you made about cutting ourselves short is so true. And
Mhm.
that's definitely what I did when I started like, oh, I'm gonna, be a service provider because prior to that I had been, running my blog. I had built my own website. I had created an email list, launched a course. Like I had done all of that by myself for myself. And then I was like, oh, I can be a VA.
Right.
And it was like, well, actually, I could have started, doing a little bit higher level, but I think it was definitely a good learning experience to
For sure.
just
Absolutely.
dig in and start. And then it was like, oh, people were going to pay for those things. People
Absolutely.
did need that help. And then gradually I was able to up level, both my services and my role in
Mhm.
people's businesses to offer higher level skills. So,
I love it.
yeah, but it's such a wide open. I mean, people say, well, sometimes people talk about it being saturated, and it's definitely not saturated. There is more and more people going online and building online businesses every single day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's also different VAs, and then we'll get off this topic, that like specialize in different things as well.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, oh, it's saturated, because some people want to focus on this, some people want to focus on that, and then they end up actually changing their role years later, like you said. So
Yeah.
it's so interesting. So tell me what you're most excited about.
Oh, what am I most excited about? This year I really made a shift in my business from having done so much implementation and actual services for people for the past 4 or 5 years. I had been doing that primarily as my primary income stream. And I have always loved strategy. And I have always loved coaching people through problems and consulting and coming up with ideas and helping people overcome things. And even when I had first started as a VA, I remember I was going to a local business meeting, and I was meeting with a couple people in the local networking group. And when I would start talking to them about all the things they could do online and like helping them with a strategy on how they could do this, they were just like, their eyes were so big and, and they were just like, they couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
But I loved sitting there and just strategizing, like, this is what you could do if you started promoting yourself online.
Hmm.
And so finally in this year, I have shifted mostly into coaching and consulting and strategy, and working with a group of women in a program that I have called Uplift. And that's probably what I'm most excited about, because it's a group experience, but it's also me providing some coaching and mentoring and strategy for the gals that are in the program. And that has been just like such a great experience for them and for me, because I feel like I'm fully using my gifts in that and supporting them and still getting to, have a business that I enjoy and like.
There you
So,
go. Yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing. I love it. I think I saw your post, of course. I'm sure I've seen it because it sounds very familiar. So it's amazing. I love it. It was very inspiring to see that. So I know you used to do podcast stuff for clients as well. And you kind of have turned away from that, I believe, but you still have your own podcast. So tell us
Yeah.
like a little bit about the podcast experience, because I know I took your course when it first came out, and it was one of those things where I knew I could figure it out if I needed to, but it was one of those things. I already knew my name, but how do I really get it going? And I don't
Yes.
even remember. It was probably a few months ago, but I don't remember exactly what I really took away from it, because there's so much great stuff that I knew, okay, I think it was like the logistics and the tech stuff, right? Like figuring out where to get it going, how do I get it on my website, like all of those things. And what do we want them to do? Like, what is the goal of the podcast? So tell me a little bit about how you kind of came about all of that. Hey, let's stop for just 1 second during this podcast episode. I know you're so excited to get back and listen, but I wanted to chat with you and talk about how we really work with businesses. What we really do is we dive in and we ask so many questions. We go through a series of questionnaires and extensive research to really help you get a clear, identifiable plan of action that needs to happen for your business. If you want to hear more about this, go to visionsnumber2images.com, click the contact us button, and we will be happy to set up a time to chat more.
Yeah, yeah. So, during my work as really kind of an OBM, online business manager, I had a client who had a podcast and
Mhm.
she wanted help with her podcast. And I love listening to podcasts. I like when I first went into the online space, that was my training ground was all listening to so many podcasts. And so I eagerly jumped into her podcast, started learning. And then I also started learning, and listening to other things about podcasting and just trying to get my mind around it because I kind of had this idea to launch my own podcast.
Yeah.
And so I did that in 2018. I launched my own podcast. I was very strategic about it. I knew, like you said, I knew what the goal of the podcast was. I had a strategy in mind. I didn't just go about it haphazardly. And then between that and my work with my other client, I started getting more and more clients who either wanted to
Mhm.
launch a podcast or who, had a podcast that they
Right.
needed help with. And so then my team and I started offering more podcast management and doing podcast launching and all of that.
Yeah.
And I really did that for a couple years. And then I had a group program that I did a couple times where I helped a group of people through launching a podcast. And then I also created, like you said, this course, which is a mini course. It's
Right.
it's a low price course
Oh,
to
totally.
help someone get their podcast off the ground. And the reason I created it is because I saw so many people, like I said, either going in and like buying one of these gigantic courses that
Mhm.
costs, a decent chunk of money, which are often very, very valuable and they will teach you everything you need to know. But
Mhm.
a lot of people who are busy moms like you, who want to get a podcast launch, but just maybe don't have a ton of time to
Right.
listen to 20,000
Right.
videos
Right.
and
I
watch,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I wanted to give something, but I also saw on the flip side some of these launch your podcast in one day kind of things that were like, they just were fluff. They didn't
Right.
give people any strategy. They might have given them like the logistics of, okay, go here and log in here and upload your episode here.
Right.
But there was no strategy to, okay, what is your podcast actually going to do for you and for your business? So that's why I created the mini course. And I wanted it to be a combination of the strategy and the shortcuts so that someone could, get it off the ground. So I still love talking about podcasting, even though we no longer provide, the implementation side. I definitely talk with a lot of my clients about podcasting as strategy around what they can do with their podcasts. And several of the gals in my program either have launched a podcast or are considering it because they
Yes.
know it can be such a powerful tool to reach people.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my biggest fears was, like you said, the course stuff, like, oh, it's another course. Oh, I don't have time. And then another part was, is this podcast going to bring me money? Is it worth my time? Is it worth my investment? And so there was a lot of stuff that when I took the course, I kind of saw it from a different way. And you can't, it's like Renee says, it's anchor content in a sense where it kind of helps build that
Yes.
authority and awareness. And it's not about the sales, it's about educating people and really having that showing up, right? It's
Yeah.
just that.
Yeah. People often feel very close to the podcast host that they listen to. Like if you think about the podcast that you listen to and
Mhm.
you think about the host, it's like you feel like you're friends with them,
Right,
even though
totally.
you have never
Exactly.
met them.
Yes, I agree.
And that's the power because when someone is walking their dog or driving down the road or on the train, whatever it is, like when they've got you in their earbuds at least 30 minutes to an hour every single week,
Mhm.
they're developing a relationship with you. And so yeah, you're right. It may not bring the sale directly, but it usually is building up that trust
Oh,
factor
absolutely. Yeah.
that they're like, "Oh wow, now I know Susie. I know what she does. I should contact her to find out about how she can help me." Yeah.
Yeah, and they keep coming back. So tell me, this is my last question for you. What advice would you give somebody if they were just starting out in your field or needed marketing help or podcast help? The door's open. Like, what kind of advice would you
Mm,
give between any of those?
So, this is something I think that I would have liked to have known when I was getting started, and that is to think about what you want your life to look like,
Mhm.
not just what you want your business to look like.
Mm.
And I talk about this a lot on my own podcast, on my business podcast, about this concept of your ideal life. And when I started my business, I dove into that VA world.
Mhm.
All I could think about was how can I get clients and how can I make money? Like that was
Right.
the only thing that I was motivated by, because at the time it was Esther either has to go get a full-time job or find a way to
Agree.
make money at home right now. And
Right.
so there's sometimes that you do have that urgency and you have that necessity to like just put your head down and do the work. At
Mhm.
the same time, what happened was a few months into that, about 6 months into it, I was overloaded, overwhelmed, couldn't keep my head above the water because I had not made any kind of plan of what I actually wanted my life to look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And so I always try to talk to my clients about, let's stop, pause for a minute before you dive into all the business plans, all the dreaming, all the ideas, and think about what do you actually want your life to look like? For me right now, it's summertime in Maine, and I know that I want more time freedom in the summer. I
Well,
don't want to be tied to the desk, every single day. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to work every day, but it means maybe I'm going to take my work to the lake and do some of it
totally.
sitting on. And so, but I hadn't really thought about that
Yeah.
prior to getting started. And I kind of dug myself a hole
Yeah.
because I ended up having so many clients that I was just very stressed out.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my best advice is like, before you dive into launching a podcast, before you dive into, creating a new service in your business, like how is that gonna help you or hinder you from getting to your actual goal of what you want your life to look like?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And it's one of those things like I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, my first one, and it's a paid one. And I've been working on my course at the same time. And it's like one of those things in my mind. I'm like, it's just mindset, right? It's just like, oh, do I want to do this? Is it part of my mission? Is it going to attract the right people? All of those things. And is it really going to be beneficial? Is it worth my time? How does it look in the future? Like all these questions are always coming up.
Yeah.
It's gotta do that. And with summer, like my schedule, I'm sure yours is your schedule is crazy too. Like my
Mhm.
son's got little half hour, like literally like 2 or 3 hour blocks to go to like a day program. And I have to work during that time and then figure out how else to work. Right. So it's one of
Yeah.
those things that I never really thought about. And as I go through, I'm thinking ahead for next year and the years to come. Like, do I want to work in the summer? Should I pull back in the summer? Should I just hire help? Is all this stuff making me happy? Am I doing the right things? Right. Like we always
Yeah.
have to think as a business owner, but also as a parent and as our life as the whole, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because our business it's not just our business. I mean, for most of us, we have we
Yeah.
have family or friends or other things that we want
Right.
to do besides business. And I can turn into a workaholic if I'm not careful. I can just, work, work, work because I like what I do. I like my work. And
Mhm.
so, but at the same time, I know that what's actually most important to me is my family and my faith and these
Mhm.
other aspects of my life. So I've got to make sure I structure it in the way that's going to support that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed our conversation and there was a lot of good ideas and thoughts here.
Yeah. Thank you, Susie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening in on this episode today. Please make sure to check out the links from your guest and Visions to Images to learn more about each other. It takes a village, as you know, so connect and grow with one another together. Thank you so much for listening.